so the way that water infiltrates around our planet and the way that human beings settled on the fork of the river is it's so critical to our cultural biological beings. One of the things that we've managed to do through, I'd say, the way that we've controlled water through engineering and management is disconnected ourselves from some of the complexities. And now we're re-experiencing those complexities as we all realize, one, how important water is, two, how we all need it. And so competition is increasing for it.
I believe we need to get people to understand that there's this inherent connectivity to water, unlike any other thing in our lives.
The difficulty is that, we've got a growing global population and 52% of people are now in an urban environment. And so they're disconnected from the system that provides their water.
To your point, water is pretty much invisible. And in an urban setting, water comes from the tap or certainly not anything related to nature.
There's an increasing level, I think, of awareness across new stakeholder groups coming in from different sectors. That means that effectively, to solve the challenge of water, there are more people interested, more people willing to do things. That's great. The problem is there's a lack of ambition to solve the problems in a timeline that we need them solving in.
Welcome to the second season of Distilled. I'm Will Sarni. We have a very diverse group of water leaders, some of which you may not know, who are having a real impact in solving wicked water problems. Distilled is brought to you by KTM. You can find all of the episodes on Spotify and YouTube. Stay with us.
I had a great conversation with James Dalton, Water Global Director at IUCN, a close friend, fellow colleague and troublemaker in the world of water. Really, really interesting perspective from James, as it always is, in that, he's grounded in this technical background, yet has a global view of what's going on in the world of water and what has to change. And we also talked a lot about corporate water strategy, water stewardship, and it's essentially 2+ decade journey to where we are right now with respect to replenish and have positive strategies, and kind of tease out a little bit of what might come next, which I thought was really interesting and why in some ways things have stalled a bit. So James, good to see you. I always look forward to our conversations. You get me to think differently, which, I value enormously. And as much as I know you, would be great to hear your origin story. How did you get hooked on water? And how did this all begin?
Yeah, I find myself working in Israel when I was 19, for a very long story as to why. But I was working on irrigated agriculture. And the thing that really, at 19, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. And I hadn't been to further study or anything at that point. And the thing that got me interested was just how people dealt with water, the differences, the politics, the technical challenges, the opportunities with it. And I was working on, modern irrigation, fertigation systems, all for export crops. And yet there was a whole range of sort of broader political strategies around that Israel was employing at the time to hold moisture within their soils, not letting water flow down to, at the time, what the Gaza Strip. And it was fascinating to watch just the politics and how that was imposed upon certain decisions, and the use of treated wastewater from Tel Aviv for growing crops and things like that. So it got me fascinated in the system. And then through a various couple of years, some good mentors going to study irrigation engineering, science and politics of rural development, that sort of thing. I ended up, through complete fluke, through some great mentors, I was working for a company at the time called ITAD, and there was a division of it, ITAD Water, and that led me to be working for the UK Department for International Development, the DFID at the time, and complete chance and just the ability to always say yes to things. I ended up working for the senior water advisor in DFID at the time, running a portfolio of projects and programs, and to inform him on what needed to be done with them. And it was pure luck, pure fluke, but it also was really sort of driven by my desire to work on water from the age of 18, 19. And from there, I was there for so many years. I did various consultancy assignments, and then left the UK and moved to Fiji late 2006, early 2007 to work in the Pacific for what was then the Pacific Islands Geoscience Commission on water resource management for the Pacific Island countries, fundraising, program development, design with them. And then I moved to Switzerland 2009 to work for IUCN as a then what was then the water management advisor before I became head of the program many years later. So yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of detail in there, but it was a fairly straightforward track, I have to say. Pure luck, pure chance, constantly saying yes. And I have to hand it to them, some great mentors who really helped me, guided me, and a pure dogged, determined nature as well. I mean, I must have written 1,000 letters back then before email was really anywhere around. 1,000 letters to different companies and consultancies and advisors in the UK, saying, what do you do? This is me. I'm very keen. And, and the thing that taught me was resilience in many ways. It wasn't so much, I was always getting answers like, well, not, everyone was very polite, but it's like, well, you need more experience, et cetera, et cetera. But it helped me build network very early. Who were these people? I had their email addresses and their phone numbers, and how would I, and then years later, I was sitting in rooms with them and talking to them and collaborating. So I think, you need a certain level, or back then you need a certain level of insistence with water, because it was there, but it was not the topic that it is today. It wasn't so understood. It was, it was very much, I came very much from an engineering academic background into the topic. What I realized actually was that whenever I talked to people who'd studied the policy aspect of water, they really had no idea because, they didn't have the technical understanding of water in terms of what is possible and what isn't possible and what's the economics around that. Whereas what I realized was that, I didn't know enough about the policy processes as well. And so my aim back then was to always have a foot in both camps. So I could understand how to get change, but I could also understand what was technically feasible. I can't, nowadays I don't feel adequate in either. But the point being that, I think if you're only pursuing a topic and interests from one side, it becomes very difficult to balance those out.
That's really, really interesting. And that, those nuggets about how you started and how you viewed the sector, whatever the sector is back then, for me ties into, my observations about you now.
Interesting.
No, I mean, we don't see each other that often, but, we do chat and, an occasional Zoom call. So, what I'm picking up from your origin story is curiosity. And, sort of that fearless desire, nature to always try something, to do something different. And there's a great quote by Yogi Berra from the Yankees, 100 years ago. And one of his quotes is, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. And I would say that you took it along the way and you kind of went your way. And then the third thing is, you and I talk about water stewardship, water strategy, and what the corporate world is doing. And I love how, very early on, you were doing something technical, but it's all the soft issues that you absorbed. And, again, shows up in conversations that I have with you now about water stewardship. So, policies, behavior, humanity's relationship with water. That's really, really interesting.
Well, I mean, I think whenever this is quite known. Whenever human beings are going searching on other planets, we're looking for water, and the way that I viewed it is, it's not just the reasons that we think we're looking for it, because we're not telling everybody why we're really looking for it. So I've always felt that it's down to three reasons. One, from a pure biological perspective, it's where life began on our planet, and therefore we assume that's where life will begin on other planets. And so in the great big search for is anybody else out there, that's what we're looking for. It might be a microorganism, but that's the reason. The second reason is that, from a purely sort of more, if you like, capitalist perspective, and possibly also, an Elon Musk perspective, I suppose, is that we can't survive there. If there is water, we can survive there because we have the technology to be able to clean it. And so consequently, it's an indicator of, can we colonize? Can we set up shop? Can we exist? So that's the second reason. And the third reason is along the same lines, is that water, the way that it moves and has shaped our planet, is an erosive material. Either ice or flow constantly breaks down things such as all of the minerals. And therefore, it's an indication that there may be minerals and other things on these planets, as well as the basic sort of, metallic and compound structure of these planets. Therefore, one, are there materials there that we can use to help with colonization, or suddenly there may be something there we don't know? I'm thinking along the lines of Avatar, and what was the material that they found? Unobtainium, which obviously unobtainable. So, and so the way that water infiltrates around our planet, and the way that human beings settled on the fork of the river, and the way that was the development of agriculture and societal structure, is it's so critical to our cultural biological beings. We don't move very quickly as biological things. We that's why we struggle with things like, alcohol, tobacco, and mobile phones. Our brains can't keep up with the technology we can produce. So we become, slightly sort of vegetative at certain times. And so water is so important to us. And one of the things that we've managed to do through, I'd say, the way that we've controlled water through engineering and management, is disconnected ourselves from some of the complexities. And now we're experiencing those complexities as we all realize, one, how important water is, two, how we all need it, and so competition is increasing for it, and three, how it drives the climate that we have. And as we mess around with that even more, and to a certain extent screw it up, consequently, we face these challenges of water not being where we thought it was, or not arriving in the same way. So that's generally why I think the curiosity and the understanding of the complexity is so critical. And of course, institutions tend to break that down to a set of management decisions, but it doesn't. The problem is that there are 900 institutions with a set of management institutions, but none of them are horizontal to the other 900, the other 899, and that's one of the main problems that we have.
Your view of that visceral connection that humanity has with water, to me, that's really important. It's certainly, we can't do anything without water. We can't survive without water, but there's this connection to it. And, in some ways, I believe we need to pursue that as we're doing all these things around water stewardship and, plumbing for water and so on, just to, get people to understand that there's this inherent connectivity to water, unlike any other thing in our lives. Maybe we would make better, I'm a bit of an optimist, maybe we would make better decisions.
I think it's, the difficulty is that, we've got a growing global population, and 52% of people are now in an urban environment. And so they're disconnected from the system that provides their water or where their waste goes. And, that's fine. There's no harm in that. We have there were some amazing cities around the world, take Singapore as an extreme, that has got water management down to the sort of, the absolute optimum efficiency. But it means that we don't value it in the same way. What we value is what comes out of the pipe. We don't value, how it's treated and managed to get to us, and we don't value who else or what else might need it along the way, and therefore what we do with it once we've finished with it. And that's one of the challenges, because it is so complicated that we can't easily describe all of those things. It's very hard for people to get their heads around those levels of value, and yet you could do some really simple things. I remember in Washington, DC, and I was actually just in the Alliance for the Stewardship Forum in Edinburgh, and there was a guy there also who makes these things, these sort of grates that go on your drains in the cities that tells you where that water is going. And it gives you an indication of where your waste is going and what you're putting down that ultimately ends up. Somebody has to clean it. Somebody has to tidy it up. And I think it's just that by connecting people back to the system of what supports them from a natural system, then consequently it gives people a little bit of a better understanding from the value perspective. And we do this, we're pretty good at this with land. People recognize and value land and wilderness. People are very good at recognizing forests. They could be better, but forests and the importance of trees, the importance of, people forget they produce oxygen that we need, that sort of thing. So we're pretty good at that because these are static systems, right? You look at a landscape, you look at a forest, but water, it might rain, it might not rain. It flows underneath the soil. It flows through the air. It flows over the surface of the soil. It can be temporary, seasonal. It can be damaging. You could be scarce. So I think that the challenge is that it's not so immediate for people to understand it or see it, and it comes with a certain level of risk and threat around it as well.
That's a really important point, which I think is a good segue into, what are you seeing right now? You just went to AWS, and that I'm quite sure was a wealth of information and, understanding what people are doing and not doing. But, I still believe, to your point, water is pretty much invisible. And in an urban setting, water comes from the tap, or certainly not anything related to nature. And that's missing. What's your take on what's going on, in particular around water stewardship? And I'm quite sure that both of our blood pressures will go up.
Well, I mean, there is a general, I'll use a water analogy, bubbling up of water topics everywhere, and I think, and that's great. I mean, it's everywhere. There are the realizations that conversations about drought is an absence of water rather than just drought being something that's to do with land. There is an increasing recognition of the role that land management plays in moisture transfer, to create clouds, to create rainfall, etc. So there's an increasing level of scientific knowledge and information. That's great. There's an increasing level, I think, of awareness across new stakeholder groups coming in from different sectors. And that's powerful and that's interesting. That means that effectively, to solve the challenge of water, there are more people interested, more people willing to do things. That's great. And so all of that has to be celebrated. And I'm certainly seeing that everywhere, this increasing recognition of water and its challenges. The problem is, I think, is that there's a lack of ambition to solve the problems in a timeline that we need them solving in. And I think that's not to say that the new players are not trying to do what they can, but I think that to a certain extent, and I don't know any other way of defining it, but I think the older institutions, the older conversations are still working on the timeline of, that might take 10, 20, 30 years to solve that, or we might get there eventually, but actually other things will hit us along the way. And I think that's the problem, is that the ambition levels need to be higher. They need to be working faster. We keep hearing that there's not a lack of capital around the world for water. The problem is there's a lack of projects and ideas. And so the difficulty is being able to take what the knowledge that exists and apply it in a structured way that can actually access finance and deliver a result. And so I'm seeing this sort of seesaw of great things out there, great institutions, new people coming to the table, but I'm also seeing just things not moving fast enough, things not moving quickly enough, a lack of dynamism of different stakeholder groups working together who could be solving each other's problems and working collaboratively, partly because they come from different parts of water. So they are effectively talking the wrong language to each other, when that is the thing that maybe needs where there's some translation required.
So a couple of things. It's laughable that anyone would set a 2050 goal, really for anything, which ties to your comment about lack of urgency. And I completely agree with you with respect to a lack of ambition, bold ideas, dynamism, and I want to say, and maybe it's just, my perspective, but when I got hooked on sustainability a couple of decades ago, there was this, we embraced innovation. It was all about like big ideas, the art of the possible, as the management consultants say.
Yeah.
And now I really feel like things have gotten dumbed down, if you will.
Yeah.
Just not that same level of, yes, we can do this, and this is what it takes. So, and you and I touched on this, but I really kind of think things have stalled in a lot of ways. It's just, just stalled.
I think it's a couple of things. I think that people don't understand the urgency of water because it rains or it snows, right? So it sort of just appears out of nowhere, and we've got this. They don't understand just how fragile that resource is and how little there is available to us in terms of fresh water, and how when we pollute it, effectively we basically just knock off decimal points constantly as we pollute it, because you have to then put energy back in to make it clean again, or just let it flow into the sea and let the natural hydrological cycle clean it for us. So I think we're not very good at understanding how fragile the system is. And that means that therefore the urgency just sort of comes and goes. It's a bit like a news story. If you recorded every flood or every landslide or whatever as a consequence of water, there'd be a bit more urgency, but we don't, because they're also natural things that happen on a regular basis. So there is a challenge there in terms of keeping water in the public eye. The other thing is that I think we're also subject to, water gets very political. I always try and compare it to something like solar. So solar energy was massively invested in by both development agencies and private finance, because they wanted to get the unit costs down and get the infrastructure in place, because they knew there's a market for solar, drives low CO2 energy generation, and thrives the economy. There is no difference for water. However, with water, we're also trying to get the unit costs down, but actually to really make it work properly, the value of water needs to go up, and somebody needs to be able to cover that in terms of the economic value. So we have this constant conflict in terms of what it means compared to solar, compared to how I look at it from a water perspective. And then at the same time, we forget that water is critical for energy generation, critical for our economies. In almost every product that we need or use or wear or eat is water. And consequently, because we don't see that, we tend to lose the interest. It drains itself off in the conversations with corporates on their ESG or their stewardship journeys. I remember talking to a lady she's since retired, but she used to work for one of the big food companies, and she said to me, the most difficult thing we have is that it's hard to convince any consumer that there are 10 tons of water in a box of cereal, because people just don't see it. They don't understand how it's used in the production of materials. And so therefore it's not present in people's minds. And I think the difficulty with the stewardship agenda is we're subject to economic downturns, profit margins, CEO change. And if they don't value it in the same way, and if money tightens up, then stewardship and sustainability is lower down the agenda, or politically lower down the agenda, as we've seen in Europe with CSRD and CSDDD backtracks. So it's kicked around like a football in the playground, water.
So absolutely agree with you. Where do you see all this going? And try to be a little optimistic, James.
So I think there are two main tracks right now that I see. One is that there is this belief that there is a need for a global organizing framework for water, where every single thing gets put in its right box and all agencies are assigned and everyone knows what they're doing and we'll all be on track. That's impossible. It's nice to have, but we don't have a global organizing framework for many things, and I don't think that's going to work. I think maybe very loosely. Where I see things going is more embedded in the complexity, the multi-stakeholder partnerships, engaging more with the private sector and private finance, embracing that complexity I spoke about at the beginning of water and how it's shaped our planet, embracing that, how everyone has a different entry point into the topic and an exit point from it. And that, I think, is where I'm seeing a greater level of people coming to the table and wanting to collaborate. The key thing is being able to keep their interest and help them mobilize for water. So rather than sort of policing ourselves around a global organizing framework, let's just harness the power of the social, environmental, and economic markets and the individuals behind that who are wanting to do things to get the results that we need.
Right. I love that. I'll schedule time for us to chat about that one-on-one. So James, real quick, how do people find out more about what you're up to and
Sure.
your point of
Sure.
view? So this is
Sure,
your
if they-
promo moment.
Okay. Well, I mean, if they go to the IUCN.org website, they'll find information there on water and wetlands. If they go to our LinkedIn profile on water and wetlands, the key thing to look at is also our waterandnature.org website, which has a whole range of different information on the work that IUCN does and its projects and programs. For us, the key thing, goes back very much to my origins about water. When I was in Israel and I came out of that and I did my first thesis on the hydropolitics of the Jordan Valley, because I was fascinated with exactly what was going on. I remember reading these NATO documents on water flows and borehole depths and the implications of water. And it was that really drove where I am today. And we have this global transparency program called Bridge, Building River Dialogue and Governance. It's on the waterandnature.org website. And that to me encompasses all of those complexities of diplomacy around water, collaboration among stakeholders, state to state collaboration. It's a really good example of that complexity.
James, a million thanks. I always, and very sincerely, I always learn a lot from my conversation with you. And you get me to think differently. So thank you for being a guest.
Thanks very much. It's great. We'll look to do it again.
Well, definitely. You're on the spreadsheet now.